Tēnā koutou katoa. Nai mai, haere mai. Good afternoon, hello and welcome everyone. It's inspiring to see many locals and friends here today. Thank you everyone for joining us for our Auckland Central election candidates debate. Today's meeting is important to us and we are all looking forward to hearing from each of the parties represented here today. Ponsonby News has always followed politics. This community is very important to us. I would like to thank Nikki Kay for her outstanding service to Auckland Central. She will be sadly missed by all of us.
We've had a draw for the speaking order, and the order will be Jenny Marcroft first, Erica Stanford second, Chloe Swarbrick third, Tuariki Delamere fourth, Vernon Tava fifth, and Helen White sixth. So I'd like to call now on Jenny Marcroft to open the addresses of the candidates with the first 5-minute speech.
Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou, he mihi mahana ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Very warm greetings to you all here today. It is an absolute pleasure to stand before you on this Sunday as we head into the election campaign. Today we kick off the campaign proper. I'd just like to start by saying to you that I absolutely would like to acknowledge all of those who sit in front of you today. It's a really great thing that people are prepared to put forward themselves to represent you. And we're going to have what I believe is a really robust campaign in Auckland Central, but I think that we can rise above the rhetoric of nasty, dirty politics and actually run a clean campaign, because really this campaign and this election is the most important election of our lifetime. Post-COVID, we have a situation where the team of 5 million have done the job necessary to keep COVID out. But now we need to turn our minds to how we will repair our economy and how we will shape our future. So it is critical that we get the issues, that we hear your questions, and that we present policy which you can then vote on the 19th of September and actually form the government that you feel is the one that will take us forward into the future. So that's kind of where I come from. I'm very much a person who works collegially as part of government. When we formed the coalition government 3 years ago, what we noticed throughout the course of those negotiations with New Zealand First is that we chose the person to be Prime Minister because we saw something in her. We saw something in Jacinda that was going to be a new style of leadership. And we have worked incredibly hard to ensure that we maintained a stable, balanced coalition government for that 3-year term, and we're very proud in New Zealand First that we were able to play a vital role in that. Today I'm with two other colleagues that we're all in the Environment Select Committee together, so that's Chloe and Erica. So we actually come to you with very similar ideas about protecting our environment, and I think that's something in Auckland Central we're all a little bit liberal. So those are some of the issues I'm sure will come up through the course of the next 6 weeks. Also too, I'd like to acknowledge Tuariki Delamere. Today in front of you, you have two people who've represented New Zealand First, although Tuariki has jumped ship. We look forward to seeing what he has to offer Auckland Central today. He brings, of course, wisdom and experience of being a Minister of the Crown. Helen White, I haven't met you until today. I look forward to getting to know you further. And of course, Vernon, I've heard many of your commentaries, political commentaries, so it'll be an absolute pleasure to spend time with you on this campaign as well. But most of all, I'd like to acknowledge you, the audience here, the people of Auckland Central. I think the most important thing that the previous Member of Parliament for Auckland Central, your electorate MP Nikki Kay had, was that she was a really good listener. And she listened to the voices of her electorate. And that is something I think you need to think about when you're choosing who will be your next electorate MP. Will they listen to the issues that concern you? Just a little bit of my brief background. I'm a single mum. I have a 19-year-old daughter. She's at university. It's her first year. She's down in Palmerston North with her horse. And she decided she would go to university, but only if she could take her horse. So she's down there having a great time. And I'm really looking forward to seeing her grow as a young woman and then venture out into the workforce. I spent a lot of my career working in Auckland Central at various media outlets. I started off in '93 at My FM when it was a fledgling radio station. I've worked on a whole heap of radio stations. Solid Gold, I was on Breakfast Show with a guy called Blackie for a number of years, worked in the newsroom as well with News Hub. It used to be called Radio Live, then it morphed into News Hub. So I have a background where I've lived here. I'm not currently living here, I'm in the greater northern part of Auckland at the moment, but I certainly have a connection to this area. So in conclusion, what I would like to hear from you are questions about New Zealand First policy, and I'll be happy to answer those. And thank you very much for coming out on this Sunday afternoon.
Thank you, Jenny. What a nice multi-partisan opening to the meeting this afternoon. I thought, thank you for that, Jenny. And I'll call on the second speaker, who is Erica Stanford, and we'll dong the bell with 15 seconds to go if you're still talking. Erica.
Thank you so much. Welcome here today. This is one of the larger crowds I've been to for an election debate. I can't imagine why there's so much interest in the seat this time round, but thank you all so much for being here. Can I just acknowledge you, John, for hosting the debate tonight, and to all the colleagues behind me, but especially my parliamentary colleagues, Chloe Swarbrick and Jenny Marcroft, and also my good friend Vernon Tava down the end. We all actually end up knowing each other very well. I just want to start by, and you've heard a little bit about Nikki Kay. I want to start by saying that she was obviously a wonderful MP, but we are working extremely hard under a very short space of time to select a new candidate, and that will be selected. They will be selected tomorrow night. We have an extraordinary pool of talent that we have to choose from, and we know very well the kind of person that we need from Auckland Central. I can't imagine why that's funny, but it's actually true. We do have an enormous amount of people, and they all wanted to be the candidate for Auckland Central because it's such a great electorate, almost as great as the East Coast Bays. But what I can say is that I know that the final three have an incredible wealth of experience behind them, and we've picked the candidates to go forward to the selection because we know that they bring a wealth of experience and they will fit really well into this electorate. And the reason that Nikki Kay asked me to fill in for her today is because I am one of those people who fit into that mould as well. And if you listen to Nikki Kay's valedictory speech, she called out three MPs specifically who are at the more liberal end of the party. There's Chris Bishop, Nicola Willis and myself. Nikki Kay and I share very much the same values, which is why she wanted me to step in today. Nikki's represented this area for 12 years, and she did so through extremely hard work and clarity of purpose and knocking on every single door, and as you've heard, listening to the issues of the community. She fought extremely hard for LGBTQ issues in the electorate. I know that the reason that the Pride Parade came back to Auckland Central was through her hard work and tenacity and working across multiple groups. I know that she advocated super hard for the City Rail Link, the Sky Path she's been involved in, the Victoria Park Tunnel and the urban cycleways. The school that we're in today, she advocated $150 million for this school, Bayfield, and also for Western Springs College, which used to be in the electorate, for the redevelopment of those schools. She is hardworking, incredibly dedicated to this electorate. But I think I have to say the defining moment of her being an MP was her work in Great Barrier, was her standing up to her caucus and saying, actually, we're not going to mine on Great Barrier. she pushed that through, and she also got the park that now exists on Great Barrier Island. And I think that will be one of the defining legacies of her being an MP for this area. It's a big deal to stand up to your caucus, and she did that for Auckland Central. The reason that I'm bringing up the incredible legacy of Nikki Kay is because we know very well that we need to select a candidate who is of a similar calibre to her, someone who will work just as hard for the electorate as she has done. And I know that tomorrow night we will be selecting someone who will fill those shoes and carry on that incredible legacy that she has left. There are a lot of issues that are facing Auckland Central, and not just pre-COVID, but since COVID, we've got a number of businesses who are facing, possibly not being able to open their doors again. It's the same across Auckland. I have it in my electorate, but especially here, since they've had the disruption to the Auckland, with all of the roadworks you all know very well in Quay Street and the City Rail link, and Auckland Transport's gross mismanagement, I would say, of traffic and the upgrades that have been going on. It's something Nikki Kay was working very hard on. But you've already got businesses who are struggling with those problems, and I know Nikki advocated for the hardship grants for those businesses, which she got. But now you're looking at a very different picture. On top of that, you've got a lack of tourists, you've got a lack of international students, which is a really big deal, not only for the universities, but for the local high schools and the local schools who rely so much on that revenue coming in from international students. It's also an issue in my electorate, something that we have to look into. So you've got this compounding of issues, including the increase in homelessness in Auckland Central. Nikki Kay did an incredible amount of work with the City Mission, and her work there has led to some pretty amazing achievements, but that is another issue that's going to rear its head, and it already is. So I can promise you that the candidate that we will select tomorrow will carry on the incredible work of Nikki Kay and carry on that legacy, but also fill those shoes to address some of those problems in Auckland Central. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Now, Chloe Swarbrick for the Green Party.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou e te whānau. My name is Chloe Swarbrick, and I'm really stoked to be running to be your candidate here in Auckland Central on behalf of the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand. The hall that we're in and the school that we're in is my little brother's old school. I actually just used to live behind Ruper's in a tiny little apartment with my mum when my little brother was here before we moved across to Beaumont Quarter, and I currently live just up the road, just off of Karangahape Road. This is the city that I grew up and around. I went to the University of Auckland, and while I was there studying a philosophy Bachelor of Arts, which my dad told me would never get me a job, and a law degree, I ended up working part-time at this little radio station, #1 alternative radio station in Auckland, 95 BFM. And there I spent, a whole lot of time looking into the issues that our city was facing, and was particularly spurred to fall down the rabbit hole of getting involved in politics, because I just felt that there was this massive dearth between what communities were advocating for, what the experts and the community leaders were talking about, and then what the politicians were actually doing. And for me, that real driving force was manifest in the closure of the King's Arms, part of which was as a result of really poor planning regulations, meaning a cheap apartment block went up right next door, and of course there were then sound complaints against this established music venue. And that for me is a perfect summation of how politics so often falls short. All of these problems that we talk about, homeless, currently sleeping down the bottom of Queen Street in front of Louis Vuitton, that stuff's not natural. The state of our hauraki, that is not natural. The fact that we have massive increases in climate changing emissions, that stuff is not natural. Which leads us to the inevitable conclusion that all of those things are man-made, which can seem quite depressing. But then you have to recognize that actually we therefore have a responsibility to change them, and that they are either that way by design or systemic neglect. And that is why I ended up in the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand after that run in 2016. Because the Greens fundamentally recognise 4 core charter principles, and I think that this stuff isn't talked about anywhere near enough, because obviously our name is green and our colour is green, and of course we care about the environment, but a lot of people nowadays, and I've probably, at least some of my volunteers, if not myself, have had the chance to talk to you on the doorsteps about this stuff, but some people now ask us, well, what about the social issues? Why do the Greens care about the social issues? Well, I just want to walk you through really briefly that core kaupapa. So all of the Green parties all across the world have exactly the same 4 core charter principles by design. The thing that differentiates the Green Party of Aotearoa New Zealand is first and foremost recognition of Te Tiriti o Waitangi as the founding document of this country. I'd note the only political party in Parliament with explicit recognition of the indigenous version of the text. The first thing is ecological wisdom, recognition of the fact that resources are finite. Even those that do regenerate need oxygen, they need space, and God forbid some planning to be able to regenerate. If you accept that as the premise, the second makes sense. That is social responsibility. If you accept that those resources are somewhat finite, that you need to ensure that everybody has base level just access to those resources to thrive and to live their best possible lives to contribute in communities. Third, appropriate decision making. Devolve decision making powers down to a level where it actually affects people. As the spokesperson for local government for the Greens in Parliament, I've been working quite hard alongside our Minister of Local Government to figure out how we can better empower particularly our local boards to make sure that they are far more responsive to the needs of local communities. The fourth, the fourth is relatively straightforward. I mean, it's in the name, non-violence. We're hippies, of course, don't like going to war, but if you actually devolve that down and figure out how it makes sense, non-violence and peacemaking is about sustainable solutions that actually involve a diversity of perspectives from the get-go, so that you don't end up with a solution that neglects people or excludes them and therefore becomes untenable further down the track. I am running to be your candidate for Auckland Central because I live here, because I have worked here, I have built small businesses here, and because I am embedded in the community here. I think that you should not see voting this election as a chore, but see your vote as powerful, because others will tell you that it is not possible to have the representation that you deserve. Please vote your first, best, strongest, most progressive choice. Vote Green.
Thank you. Thank you, Chloe. And now I'll call on the representative of the Opportunities Party, Tuariki Delamere. Thank you, Tuariki.
Kia ora mai ki a koutou. First, I'd just like to congratulate Chloe. If it takes a celebrity to get the marijuana bill over the line, then that's great. I tried it about 22 years ago at the UN. 4 weeks ago, I was just not planning on doing this. I was happily talking to TOP and giving them some hopefully helpful pointers, but then the National Party decided to reinvent the definition of a week's a long time in politics. 24 hours is obviously a long time in politics. Then Nikki resigned, and she has been a very good local MP. I've known Nikki for a few years, and I think we all want to congratulate her and wish her the best of health, because she is fighting some battles. I have a few ideas of that myself. But when that happened, I thought, well, why just talk the talk, get up and walk the talk? So, walking the talk at least to the 19th. I see a look around the audience. Many of you weren't really that involved in politics or knowing much about in the 90s, so I'll give you a quick background of me. Long time ago, I graduated from high school, took off and accepted a scholarship to Washington State University and graduated with a bachelor's in 1974. The next 4 years, I was on the staff of the United States Military Academy at West Point, and while I was there, I managed to somehow get hold of a Master of Business Administration degree. And during that time, I used to dabble in athletics. I was reasonably good, and I'm actually the current world somersault long jump record holder. Now, that's not as impressive as it sounds, because a few months after I did it, those old fuddy-duddies who ran world athletics, including the late Cess Blazier of New Zealand, decided to ban it. So for the last 45 years, no one's allowed to try and beat it. So I'm quite happy to live on that. But the guy who convinced me to do it was the Olympic decathlon champion, a guy called Bruce Jenner. He influenced me to do that. But let me assure you, when Bruce became Caitlin, I haven't been influenced on that issue. So anyway, I ended up in Parliament in the 90s, and I became Minister of Immigration, Associate Treasurer. And I was with the Wairiki electorate and Māori electorate. Campaigning in Māori electorate is a bit different. This is an amazing crowd, by the way, and congratulations for all you turning out, because I think most campaign meetings around here, you're not going to get anywhere near that. But that's great. Yeah, oh yeah, congratulations, Chloe, again. You've got a few supporters here. But campaigning in the Māori electorate is a lot easier, you see. You just check, you go down to the obituaries and see where the nearest tangi is. So you behave yourself during the tangi, and at the hakari afterwards, they always ask you to speak, and there's always a big crowd there. But anyway, that's a long time ago. I joined TOP. Why TOP? The people there are passionate, they're committed, and I believe their ideas are very good. They want change because, and COVID has highlighted that more than anything. Change needs a chance. And those who criticize the Prime Minister, I think they're on the wrong track. She's chosen elimination, and most of us totally support her for that. There are those who say, open up, bring all the students in. Well, I bring in immigrants. You know, I got an office up there on Queen Street. I always used to have another business on K Road. Some of you probably might have even attended it when I was there for 11, 12 years. It's called Finale, Drag Queens. That was quite interesting for 10, 12 years. But I don't want the government to open up the borders just yet. Because I look around the world, and everyone's going like that. And then I look over at Melbourne, and Melbourne was like us 6 or 7 weeks ago. And now look at them. It's out of control. They're having multiple deaths. And we've been brilliant. And the Prime Minister has to take the credit for all that. But what do we need to do? Two of the worst things that we have in this country is housing. Housing, it's unaffordable to buy, unaffordable to rent. Housing is one of the biggest causes of mental health, dysfunctional families. Fix housing, you'll fix those problems. And I'll give up.
Thank you, Tuariki. You'll get some chances in questions. Now, the fifth candidate to speak will be the Sustainability Party leader, Vernon Tava.
Good afternoon. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout here in Democracy in Action. My name is Vernon Tava. For many of you, the party Sustainable New Zealand will need some introduction. This is a party that was founded in the insight that if we care about the environment, if we care about sustainability, and that has its dimensions, environmental, economic, social, then that doesn't need to be a thing that is of the left or the right. In fact, it's a new type of politics. A politics that's on a whole new axis from the left and the right. But until now, if you've wanted to vote for an environmental party, you have had to vote for a party of the left. And we want to offer you another option. Now, if COVID has shown us one thing, it's that our natural environment, our beautiful parks and cycleways, the natural environment that we enjoy are sacrosanct. They're things that we can't replicate. They are the very essence of the lives we live. Another thing it's shown us, though, too, is that we can be world leaders, but also that we can't continue to rely on the industries that we've leaned on so heavily, on tourism, on relying on international students, on relying on primary industry to the extent that we have. This is our chance to reset and reinvent our economy. And the way that we can do that is based on innovation. That is how we will deal with our two of our most persistent problems in New Zealand. And those persistent problems are environmental degradation and low productivity, which equals low wages. You know, I heard in one of the more draconian tax proposals that was floated by another party just the other week, the idea that people over 150,000 a year should be charged a very high income tax rate. That, look, that's okay because only 6% of people make over that amount of money. And I thought, well, that's precisely the problem, is that only 6% of people are able to make over that amount of money. This is our opportunity to create an economy through careful government-guided investment and support for private industry, not treating business and commercialisation as a bad thing or a thing that we can't trust, but as a thing that we should guide and work with to foster innovation and export that intellectual property, which we are so good at producing, as a way to tread more lightly on the earth, as a way to actually have a much lower and slighter environmental impact, and also become richer while we're doing it. That's the way that we can protect our environment. That is the sustainable way to protect our environment, instead of attempting to get there through heavy taxation and regulation and politics that are of the left. We can do it by being a centrist party, and this is a core contention, a centrist party that's prepared to work with Labour or National or whoever else is in a position to form a government to get the best deal for the environment and for economic prosperity. Because when you pledge your fealty to one side of politics or the other, then you can be safely ignored by the other side and taken for granted by the party that you've hitched your wagon to. Now, a little bit about me. I love this electorate. I've lived in Auckland Central for over a decade. I went to university here. I did my undergrad and my master's degrees here in law. I currently work in the area as a criminal defence barrister. I was elected as one of your local representatives on the Waitemata local board for the past 6 years. So I've seen the whole gamut of experiences, both the people who live in Herne Bay, St Mary's Bay, right down to the homeless people that you see on Queen Street. Have dealt with all of them, have heard and understood and worked with them on all of their concerns. One of the more inspiring experiences I had actually was working with a group of people who are dealing with a housing issue, where the special housing area along Great North Road. And the residents there were horrified at the idea that there could be 6-storey buildings all the way along there. And this, of course, is the kind of intensification that we do need, A, to live more lightly on the land, but also to provide affordable housing and to provide people the kind of quality of life that they need in this electorate. But people were horrified at the idea that there were going to be all these 6-storey buildings. So we actually worked together and had a project with them, funded by the local board and the council, and over time actually reached a situation where people embraced the possibility of 6-storey buildings, which they were initially aghast at, if they were in the right spot. If we actually worked together on that fine-grained detail and worked out where they should go, on the corner sites, on certain parts where they wouldn't shade too much, that was the place to be. That's the kind of thing we can achieve when we work together, and that's the kind of commitment I would make as a local representative. We need to clean up our inner city beaches and harbour. I would be committed, $1 billion from the government. That's a huge amount of money for local government, but for central government, that's a small amount of money. We could completely clean up those inner city beaches and make that happen quickly. Look forward to talking to you more in the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vernon. Now, the 6th candidate is Helen White, the Labour Party.
Kia ora. It's actually just a wonderful thing to be here today. It is an incredibly engaged community, and I suspect it's going to become more so. A lot of the people in the audience are people I do know, and I know them from all my walks of life. I can see Blake from one of the unions I represent. I can see my parents. I can see my brother. who's loyally stood up for me on social media in recent weeks, and I've put him in charge of doing my eulogy. And I can see so many people who have supported the idea of this seat actually becoming a Labour seat once again. I want to talk a little bit about who I am, because apparently some of you are criticising me for not knowing. I hope today you will get to know me a little bit. So I actually went to this school. This was Napier Street School when I came here, and it was quite a different landscape. I lived across there in the townhouses, and it was a pretty great childhood. We had little commons in the middle of the townhouses because they were built really thinking about community. And so all these kids in my common fought with all the kids in the next common. And it was sometimes cruel, but it was a lot of fun, and a lot of those people are still my friends today. It's an incredibly strengthening thing when you get it right. Now, last election I stood because I had become extremely concerned by what I could see in our city. I actually live in Morningside now, and I work in the city. And it was actually the kind of work that at that time it was almost a dirty word to say certain things. You couldn't mention the homeless. It was a sort of sleeping toad in water. We were just ignoring it. And there were people on the case, and one of them was John Campbell. Do you remember? He was doing those wonderful sessions, and actually it was incredibly moving. People were living in their cars. I was actually stepping over people on the street. We had a really harsh alienation of people, and we had a place that was in chaos in lots of ways, where people really hadn't looked after our city, and they hadn't looked after our sense of community. And I say that knowing that Nikki was one of the absolute best people in the National Party at that time. And it was despite her striving, probably, that we were living in a city that was like that. And so I became involved because I really wanted and cared about my own community and seeing it grow. And part of that experience was actually just door knocking up at the apartments up here. And I've got to say, I was a bit shocked, because the same level of income now buys you an apartment surrounded by roads where people walk across those roads with their kids. They come down to the school. They don't even have their own local school. And that, to me, just seems absolutely a shame. No care was going into the way we designed the space. And so we weren't thinking about whether those kids needed green spaces. That sort of thing is extremely, extremely important, and the devil's in the detail. That's what I do for a living. I'm an employment lawyer. I meet with people, I talk with people, I fix their problems in an extremely pragmatic way. And that's what I want to do for you as a constituency MP. Now, I want to do that regardless of what you think. I want to be able to do it when you come to my office. I want to be able to try and help fix your problem. And yes, I have some strong ideas. There are ideas about things like really reasonable rental arrangements, stable rent, because not everybody even gets to afford to buy a house. But I want people to be able to afford to buy a house, and I want them to be able to afford it in this community. And so those are the sorts of things that I do have strong ideas on. I really care about wages going up, because that's what I do. That's my bread and butter. I see how that affects people's lives and their dignity and their mental health. And those are the things I will care about. But if you come and see me and I get lucky enough to be your constituency MP, I promise to take care and care about your issues and listen to your issues. I just want to talk about one thing that happened last night. We were at a fundraising dinner, and I'm getting inundated with emails these days. I'm working full time. It's not actually that easy. But one of the little emails that came through was from one of the older members of our community who lives up in one of the streets around here, and was just talking about how hard it is to go to the doctor. You know, and I thought, I know that situation. I know when you get old and you can't drive a car anymore. How do you do that? Because my parents are in this community in exactly that situation. So it's about knowing your community. And I do, and I promise to work for you if you elect me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to the 6 candidates. We now turn to questions. And before I start, I want to reiterate what I said about being fair and kind and not bullying and playing the ball instead of the man or the woman. And I will be quite strict on this. I make no apologies for the fact that we're wasting time if we have someone stand up and make a long statement instead of asking a question. I will simply say, sorry, you've had your time, next question, and we'll move on to somebody else. So that's how it'll be. We'll have about between 1 and 2 minutes for each question, depending on the question. Some can be a little bit longer than others. Now, there's one more thing. I don't think it's necessary that all 6 of the speakers need to speak on every question. And so if you have a question which you might want to ask 1 or 2, several of the candidates, then please do that. If it's a question to all candidates, I'd prefer it to be short and sharp and almost a yes-no. But that's over to you. But the more questions we have that have 6 answers, the longer we take, the fewer the questions, and I'll be struggling to get that 6 o'clock deadline. My first question from the chair is, how have the lessons from COVID impacted on what you regard as critical issues for New Zealand in the decades ahead? Who would like to start? Chloe.
Thanks. So like a minute, this isn't particularly long. So I think the really important thing to kind of start from is that we have all recognised by virtue of coming together and following public health advice and evidence and science that we can make massive changes. The very fact that we are sitting here shoulder to shoulder in this very packed room is indicative of what can be achieved when we decide to follow that evidence and science. And, you know, we are doing this in the context of other countries right now bickering about the efficacy of masks. Imagine if we followed the same kind of science with regard to climate change, but we'll leave that to the side for now. Really important, really important. All of the things that we were told for so long were politically or economically or whatsoever else impossible. Housing the homeless, providing flexible working arrangements for people with disabilities or sole parents, increasing core benefit levels for our most marginalised and vulnerable communities. All that stuff happened virtually overnight, and it exposed it not as a matter of being politically or economically or otherwise impossible. It exposed it as a matter of political willpower. And what I hope that I have demonstrated to you in my last 3 years in and outside of government is that I have the opportunity to walk alongside Labour and to hold them to account. As the Minister of Education said, we are the conscience of that party, but also we have the opportunity to integrate all of those design thinking principles and to ensure that we build back better with environment and social well-being at the core of everything that we do. Kia ora.
COVID-19 has shown us that the corporates who insist that we can't change are wrong. A green future is so easily possible. That's what I've noticed from COVID. I mean, COVID's been terrible, obviously, on the health side. But gee, when you look at the planet from space, not that I've been up there yet, it's greening all over the place. And that's brilliant. We can have clear skies forever, and COVID has proven that can be done.
Yeah, okay. I think the first lesson is one that was learnt pretty quick once we were locked down. I've got a National Party neighbour, and she told me, we're all socialists now. And that's because, like, look at the consensus we're getting here. You know, we have bonded, and we can talk cliches, but we have bonded. We are a tribe, and we've looked after each other. And one of the things I saw happen was I found a place, I found a voice. I was I'm an employment lawyer, and I realised that I had a contribution to make because I could actually answer questions from the point of view of all those workers who were actually now isolated. They didn't have unions, they didn't have the money for legal representation, and they had to make decisions about their lives very quickly. I was also able to help small businesses and really talk about how to handle the situation and calm down in quite a frightening situation. So it was very helpful in terms of what I think I have to contribute, but it was way, way more important for us in terms of that connection to our own values, because if our leadership had not had those values, if they had not put people absolutely at the heart of things, where would we be now?
I'm just going to be a typical Tory for a minute and talk about the economy. One of the things that I think we've learnt out of all of this is how important is our farming sector and our horticultural sector. And I'll tell you what, just a number of months ago, we were, well, not we, but governing parties were slamming the farming sector, telling everyone what a terrible job that they were doing and coming down on them really hard. These guys have got huge amounts of debt, huge amounts of stress, one of the highest suicide rates in the country. And all of a sudden they're the champion of New Zealand. Well, I tell you what, they always were. We rely on them now more than ever to get our country back up and running. The second thing I'd like to say is that one of the things that's come through is how much we rely on our business sector, because it's businesses in New Zealand that will create jobs to get us back on track. The government can do as much as it can through infrastructure projects, and they will, but governments don't create jobs, the business sector creates jobs, and it's how we support now those businesses moving forward, how we back Kiwis and how we back New Zealand businesses, whether that's accessing their KiwiSaver to start a new business, whether that's allowing them to get some GST back from the beginning of the year. Well, I back New Zealanders to know what to do with their own money, quite frankly. And if you don't believe that, then don't give me your vote. Well, you can't give me your vote anyway. But the point is that I back Kiwis and I back New Zealand businesses, and the National Party back New Zealand businesses of a way of getting this country moving. And it's the National Party policies of giving some of that GST back, allowing companies to draw down $10,000 for every new employee that they take on, or giving New Zealanders some of their own cash to start their own businesses, because we back New Zealanders and New Zealand businesses.
Thank you. One of the most important things we did during lockdown is we came together as a nation. And we need to continue to do that to survive post-COVID. Whether it is coming together as a small community or a larger community or as government. We have had 3 years of a coalition government of 3 very different and unique parties who have worked effectively together. And the leadership, I believe, has been outstanding through all the crises that this country has faced over the last 3 years. I believe the most important thing that needs to happen from this point on is that we continue to have a government that is stable. We need to continue to have exemplary leadership that is wise, that brings experience, and that has people at the heart of it. That is what you've had with the last 3 years. If we want to get our economy going so that we have jobs and future jobs, and we have the creation of employment, then what business tells us is that we need a government that is stable and that will enable business to get on being businesses, creating jobs. That is the most important thing post-COVID, that the people are at the heart of the government, that we have strong leadership, and that we have sensible policy that enables business to create the wealth for the country. Thank you.
COVID showed us a few things, that our isolation can be a virtue. It also showed us, though, just how fragile the economic system under which we live and prosper is. And the idea that we're going to find a path back to survival, let alone prosperity, by chasing after the vanishingly small tax dollars of, you know, the fewer and fewer people who are able to survive on high incomes is folly. The only way we are going to get out of this at all, let alone prosper, is by fostering what we're really good at, fostering the innovation I was talking about before. And through that, we create good green jobs. We have industries that are light on the earth. We're not relying on shipping in tourists, on bringing in international students. We've seen the sort of stress that that puts on infrastructure and housing in the central city. You know, this is not high quality economic growth. What we need to focus on is actually what we're very good at. New Zealand generates a disproportionate amount of very, very high quality intellectual property. And that is a thing if the government actually focuses not on trying to take over and do this itself, but on incentivizing commercialization. This is something that could be wonderful for the Auckland Central electorate with the technology transfer offices that are in our innovation policy. I encourage you to look that up at sustainablenz.org.nz. That would be an absolute boon for this area and provide very high quality, high paying jobs for New Zealanders and for Aucklanders, and that's our way forward.
Thank you, Vernon. Now, I have a list of questions that have come. Did you write all these, Martin? I'm going to ask one more, and then I'm going to ask for questions from the floor, so there'll be plenty of opportunity. This question, I think probably everyone will want to have a go at this. How does a decision on the future of Auckland Port, which of course is in Auckland Central, relate to your vision for the Auckland Central electorate with regard to tourism, transport, population intensification, and the use of our waterfront? Who'd like to start?
Thank you very much. Kia ora. You might have heard my colleague, actually a couple of my colleagues, Winston Peters, he lives in Auckland Central, also Shane Jones, he lives up north. You might have heard them talk about move the port north. And the reason for that is to energise Northland, it's to free up Auckland, and so that Aucklanders can reclaim their waterfront, reconnect with their waterfront. It's actually a two-port option. It's actually send some of it down to Tauranga, to the port of Tauranga, and then send some of it up to Northport. Most modern cities, all the good ones around the world, they have direct access to their port, to their waterfront. And we have this really cool car park down there. That's not the best use of that land. And we also think, New Zealand First also thinks, that actually Aucklanders aren't getting value out of it in terms of the coin either. So while it stays there and you're getting very little revenue back into the coffers, then it's a waste of time. It needs to move. The other part of our plan is that we also put in, we've been spending over $5 billion, I think it's close to $6 billion over the last three years, upgrading our railways. Now, getting produce onto the railways is a far better, less carbon getting emitted into our atmosphere. So we need to have a dry port, which will be out west. The trains will connect from the north, out west, from down in Tauranga, out to west, and then the products can come in from there. It is a way forward that's greener, gets congestion out of the city, and we can develop some really cool stuff down on the waterfront. I would love to see an art centre down there, personally.
Actually, largely tōtoko what Jennifer has just said. Probably the major divergent point is actually that the Greens aren't necessarily very fixated on where the port ends up. And it does seem as though there is more work required to be undertaken what that looks like and the kind of transition period that we go through, particularly getting all of those cars out of that car park. But it is really critically important to us, and this is another great example of how we can better design our city, how we can better plan our city. Speaking to access to those those public spaces which are so critical for allowing a diversity of a community to come together, to rub shoulders, to share ideas, and to engage in things like arts and culture and small business and communities and innovation and all of that great stuff that helps the city to thrive, let alone those kinds of activations that right now you're seeing are driven largely by Heart of the City and all of the small businesses around there. All of that stuff is far more possible when we begin to unlock that port. And we also have far less cars, far less trucks, heavy trucks on our road and spewing out fumes, which of course creates a whole lot of issues with regard to air quality in the central city. So more investment in rail and unlock the port for Aucklanders. Kia ora.
Personally, I've never been a fan of putting the port in North Auckland. I just look at the map and how do you get everything from up north? You know, there's not many ways to get them here, but it should move, obviously. I understand the latest report was talking about the best option was Manukau Harbour. Now, I'm not sure about that, but I agree with Chloe, there's a lot of work to be done. But like everyone, the port should definitely be removed from downtown. Downtown's just not big enough for a start, and we need to look at where it should go. And the reality is, Winston, the great majority of people live Auckland South, not North.
It's actually hard to disagree with a lot of what's been said, so I won't. I would go a step further, though, and say that when the port is moved, and this isn't an easy matter of, oh, yeah, let's just flick it up to Northland, that's not going to present any problems. It will take time to do it properly and to do it in a staged fashion, but it is a thing that should be done. I would go a step further, though, and say that all those reclamations that have been made should be pulled back, and we should restore that harbour to its most natural possible state and have a city that befits its beautiful natural setting.
Okay, thank you very much. Is anyone else? Oh.
Sorry, all right. Look, I can probably answer it really quickly because I think there's a lot of good ideas and it's again, quite strong consensus here. I think the big issue is that we have two very conflicting reports and we really do need to get it right. It did seem incredible that we got to the point where they were planning hotels and they have car parks down on the waterfront. It is premium land and it could be an incredible asset to us, but we also do have the problem of the environmental impact if you're just trucking stuff up to Auckland. So it's a really important issue. I think the will is there to make it right. We just need to get it right.
Thank you very much. Now, could I have questions from the floor now, please? There's 1, 2, 3, 4. See how we go with those. Thank you. Did you get that order?
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko H. McCarthy tōku ingoa. I'd like to ask this question to every candidate on the panel. What is your vision for the future of rainbow communities in Aotearoa, and particularly here in Tāmaki Makaurau?
I think I'm the token rainbow on the panel. You'll find here within our fantastic policy vision document, Think Ahead, Act Now, I noted that Vernon was the first to refer to his website. You can find this at the Green Party's website. So there are a number of really key things, particularly the likes of banning conversion therapy, creating an office for rainbow communities, passing the Births, Deaths and Marriages Bill that enables people to self-identify, and respecting and addressing and funding healthcare needs for our rainbow whānau. But I think just as quickly as possible, noting that John's currently struggling to find his timer, people end up being held out by the characteristics of themselves which are slightly divergent or different, and obviously that's important to embrace all of us. I am somebody who is young, and a lot of people go, oh, what do young people want? young people aren't homogenous. You know, we have the young Nats, for example. But, you know, it's really important to recognise that we are also people at the end of the day, and we are part of broader communities. Our rainbow whānau is disproportionately represented, as are younger people, in the homeless population. And you see that walking along Karangahape Road. And that is where it's critically important that we are funding those community-led services that will directly work with and within our communities. There, the Māori wardens in particular have been doing impeccable work, Rainbow Youth and LifeWise as well. So I've been actively involved with, for example, with LifeWise. In 2018, I spent every single Monday going out with Aaron Hendry, who's one of their youth workers, and going to particularly their West Auckland emergency housing development. And there I saw the incredible work that peer supporters can do. So we just need to get in and back those kinds of innovations that are already happening.
I'll just be extremely brief, and I've just got a comment to Chloe. I never want to hear you say you're the token rainbow. No, you're not token at all.
I've just got another comment to make to Chloe. Don't forget these young have got to fund us old superannuitants, so we've got to be nice to them.
In 1998, when I was appointed as Minister of Immigration, I called the General Manager over. We're going to reduce the requirement for gays to be recognised for visas down to 1 year, same as heteros. Oh, Minister, you can't do that. Okay, you're right. We'll raise the heteros up to 4 years, just like the gays. The issue is true equality. That's all I'm about. And I think I mentioned before, I've had a bit to do with the rainbow community, with drag queens and all such. And recently, I represented someone who was outed by his stock exchange company as being HIV positive and gay. We secured a fairly large settlement for that.
Thank you. I'll just start with our record. I mentioned earlier about Nikki Kay's incredible work with the rainbow community in Auckland, and I don't think that anyone could fault her for that. I just like to say when she was a Minister for Youth, she gave the first contract to Rainbow Youth to provide funding for bullying in schools. And linking on from that, I think, and I know very well, because I've got a bit of experience with this, is that LGBTQI youth have a far greater rate of attempted suicide of any group, young group. And I think our focus, and I know certainly our focus, is on when it comes to mental health. We'll certainly be on that group, but broader than that. I mean, when we left office, we had a $100 million package for mental health across 17 different areas. That wasn't picked up, and I understand why it wasn't. I know the government have been working with a number of different working groups for the last 3 years, but certainly we would like to see that funding put back, a large amount of that put back into the community.
Hi, I don't want to be repetitive, and obviously, again, this is an issue which there's a lot of consensus. I wanted to add a little bit. It was interesting, we had a discussion during the COVID shutdown, because I was doing a whole lot of Zooms on how it was impacting on people, and really just trying to offer support to different communities. And one of the things that we talked about was that in that time, what actually happens is the vulnerable get more vulnerable. And so people who were actually in the rainbow community, particularly the trans community, were really impacted because they were having to start again with regard to work, and that we needed to do everything we could to wrap round support. And some of that was happening. We were actually providing quite a lot of support as a government for those services, and I hope to absolutely continue it. Freemans Bay has the proudest history in terms of supporting a very tolerant community, including a rainbow community that's very strong, and I recognise it, and I absolutely am proud of it.
Right, the next questioner was number 2. Was he on the front?
You're number 3. What's it?
Thanks, Gail. Kia ora, my name's Ross, and my question is about the job seeker benefit. And it's for everybody, so please share your thoughts. The individual job seeker benefit is $250 a week. In contrast, the COVID-19 wage subsidy guarantees certain workers $585 a week. What do you think these amounts say about job seeker benefit levels? And do you support increasing the job seeker benefit?
A minute and a half? Yeah, so thank you, Ross. I'll answer this as quickly as possible. First and foremost, we know and we have known since a raft of reforms were first instigated in the 1980s, then further pulled back in the 1990s, that our benefit and social welfare system simply has not been working. Some people would say that is broken. I would argue that it's actually functioning exactly as it was intended to. If you look at the KPIs that began to be introduced under the former government, there's this real celebration of kicking off sole parents with no conversation about where they went. And then we ended up having these conversations as a country about people sleeping in cars. That's where those people went. So the Green Party's solution is our Poverty Action Plan. Our Poverty Action Plan would massively reform the social welfare system as it presently sits. You've just noted the real discrepancy in the current support for those who have lost their jobs as a result of COVID, and those who potentially lost their jobs a few weeks earlier before that kicked in, being the job seeker benefit of $250 per week. We know that is below the poverty line. And we also know, if we want to talk about the research and evidence, because we're really keen to do that on COVID, but not particularly on social issues, that is how we end up with intergenerational poverty. What our Poverty Action Plan will do, in a nutshell, is raise all core benefit levels to $350 per week. It will ensure that everybody has the dignity to save, to live, and to get themselves out of the poverty that some people, it is a trap, it is a hole. And we will do so by way of the taxation policy, which I'm sure Vernon would love to talk about.
Who's next? Who's next?
Thank you. I'm really proud of National Party's record over our last term of government, where we got 60,000 children who were living in benefit-dependent households out of benefit-dependent households and into households with one or more parent that was working. And that was an incredible legacy that I'm extremely proud of, because we know that children living in benefit-dependent households have some of the worst outcomes of any other children. Now, you were very right to say that there is definitely a two-tier system that we have right now. But our focus has always been, if you listen to Louise Upston the other day on The Nation, our focus is to get people off the benefit, because we know that having a parent in work or having people in work is so much better than having people trapped in cycles of poverty. And what you hear from the Green Party, and probably the Labour Party too, is this constant fluffing the pillow of misery. We're going to make it a little bit better for you on the benefit. Well, I tell you what, we don't want people to be on benefits. We want people to be working. And the things that we're proposing this election are to get people out of the trap of benefit dependency and into work, because that is the way forward for our people. And just incrementally, which we did under the last government, incrementally increasing the benefit rate as we need to do, is in the end not the answer. The answer is continuing to get people into work, taking that money and getting people retrained, upskilled, getting them the clothing that they need, getting them the confidence that they need to get into work, and providing the jobs that they need at the end of that process.
One of the difficulties we have in this country is that our income tax system is so complex, so complicated. And if those of you who may be familiar with Staples Rodway income tax guides, about that thick. And the rich, the corporates, they have an army of accountants to find ways to drive through that. And so they pay very little tax, many of them. TOP is going to introduce a universal basic income. To pay for that, there will be a flat tax rate of 33% that everyone will be able to pay for. If you keep it simple, it means those rich people, rich corporates, and those who don't pay anything, like Google and the banks, will pay their fair share of taxes. Universal basic income will be set at $250 a week for adults, every adult, $40 for every child you have. So a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 children, will have a basic income of $30,160 to do as you please.
I want to start by actually reacting a little bit to something from my National Party colleague. One of the concerns that I have is that I'm not sure that the people who live in cars are actually on benefits. I think they're actually often working. And that's because I've known some. And I think that's where we got. We got to the shocking reality that people's incomes were so low and rental was so precarious and more expensive often than owning your own house. You could just never get out of it. I appreciate absolutely why people are worried about the disparity between the two income levels. I don't like it either. I think it happened because we've got a whole lot of people who are suddenly in a position where they've already got those kinds of outgoings, and we didn't want to see mortgagee sales. But I don't think that that's the entire answer. I think the answer is we do need benefits to rise, and we need to stop punishing people. Thank you.
Yeah, just one quick point. I certainly understand the point about the appearance of a two-tier system. I think it's an important point that it's very much a short-term expedient, the COVID subsidy, which is running out now. But look, it's a point well made. Ultimately, speaking as someone in a minor party, very minor party, these are decisions that were made by one of the big two. It's either red team or blue team who will decide whether benefits go up or not. As far as it's economically sustainable, we should always try to do this, but our focus is first and foremost on creation of jobs for people to go to. But if I might just make a quick point about the UBI proposal, a flat tax rate of 33% across the board. Anyone who knows how progressive taxation works, that would be a massive tax increase for people on lower incomes. So think about that.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a quick point, noting that that during COVID, that wage subsidy was also to support businesses so that they could ensure their survival through that period as well. So just noting that. New Zealand First, during our term in government with Labour and our confidence and supply partner, the Greens, we made sure that we were, and it was actually our coalition agreement, that we would raise the minimum wage. So by 2021 it will be $20. So that was something we have acknowledged as a government was a really important thing to do. Also, we believe we need to provide opportunities for young people. Mana in Mahi is a program which we have rolled out, getting young people who weren't engaged in work to get into the job stream. So that has been a real focus of the government. We also need to ensure that you can get training for free. So we've been rolling out programs for trades training, our free first year at university. So these are all ways we can help people re-engage in the employment sector, whether you're a young person just starting out from high school or whether you're having a second chance at a new career, that we have education available that will get you to that next step. Thank you.
I'll stay here with my question if you don't mind. Okay, so I'm Gail, and you've probably seen my letters to the editor of the Ponsonby News on returning tree protection. Auckland Council spent $11 million last year with treescape, mostly taking out large trees. Yes. My question to you is, what are you going to do to return tree protection, the protection of the 4% of arable land in this country that we need for growing crops, and what are you going to do to save the native forest in Western Springs?
Kia ora. First thing, you may or may not know this, but it's been talked about a whole lot in the news recently. The Resource Management Act previously used to protect trees. It was called urban tree protection. The former national government removed that, arguably to make it easier for development, but we've actually heard in front of the Environment Select Committee, which 3 of us here are on, that a whole lot of architects and those who are involved in design would far rather to have developed around and integrated those trees, because that is good design. On the Environment Select Committee, I actively worked to try and reinstate tree protection. And it is really important that you know that I was the only Member of Parliament, the Greens were the only party in Parliament advocating to reinstate that tree protection in the RMA.
Tree protection should be reinstated, but not in the context of the RMA. The RMA is an absolute dog's breakfast. It's been completely disowned by the man who passed it. It's now roughly twice the length it was when it was passed. Every government has had a go at it. It is a complete and utter mess, and I can say that having worked as a resource consent commissioner for some years. An absolute nightmare to navigate and to work with all sorts of perverse outcomes. What we need is 2 separate pieces of legislation, a Strategic Planning Act and also a Building and Natural Environments Act, along the lines of the Randerson report recommendations. That's the right way forward. The reintroduction of tree protection standards there would be a great thing. We need to see that. I think people have had plenty of time now. Those who did have trees they wanted to remove, they've had their chance. It's time to bring that back. And that would apply especially to native trees. Just to mention about Western Springs, the protection of the native forest, absolutely. The giant dying pines that tower over them, no, they should go.
Just adding to the kōrero around our trees, New Zealand First is very interested, and we have put in this term of government a whole heap of money into protection for Kauri. Kauri dieback is an absolute travesty. We really need to make sure that even through this COVID period, we don't take our eye off the ball. We have put in a whole lot of money to get those tracks built, particularly the Waitakere Ranges and all the reserves around Auckland, to make sure that you can still re-engage with your bush, with your ngahere. It is so important that we put some pressure on the Auckland City Council, because with their rate rise that they're about to do, and with the huge budget blowout they've got, they will be pulling back on their Kauri dieback program. That is just terrible. Write a letter to the Mayor.
Just briefly, because I think there's probably 3 or 4 of us on this table who believe the same thing, and the National Party have been saying for a very long time that the Resource Management Act, as Vernon said, is an absolute dog. It's been, I think we've amended it 17 or 18 times. It's hundreds of pages long, it's unwieldy, and it needs to be split into 2 separate documents, as Vernon said. I think it's the problem with the RMA is it's been highlighted by this exact issue. When you try and get try to build houses on the one hand and try to protect the environment on the other in one act, it just doesn't work, and you get the worst of both worlds. So the Randerson report was right on the money. The National Party have been saying this for a very long time, but I would just like to point out that the single lone voice on the Environment Select Committee advocating for tree protection was completely out of scope for the bill. We couldn't put it in, but the government had 3 years to put that back in. The government had 3 years to protect trees, and they've failed to do so. There's a number of other things: cameras on fishing boats and electric vehicles. The Green Investment Fund's only made one very small fund allocation of funds over 3 years. There's a number of green things that haven't happened. That's just one of them. These guys have had 3 years to put tree protection back into Auckland, and they've failed to do so.
Okay, so I'm the non-politician amongst the group, and I just want to talk about my own personal experience of that, which was that, yes, it's an 850 page RMA, which is completely nuts, and we have a beautiful report done which is being gone through by Randerson. It's very thoughtful. We've actually got a list candidate who will get in above me on the list. She helped write that report, so we have some depth of knowledge in this area. But I can say that when I was doing a renovation at my house many years ago, I had to hand dig ground what was called a liquid amber. It had taken 20 years to grow. It was not a very beautiful beautiful tree. There was no subtlety and discrimination, and often, like I say, the devil's in the detail. We need the right piece of legislation. We absolutely need to protect important trees, and we need to protect our environment. And I think we got it wrong, and we need to get it right. Thanks.
I found it fascinating listening to someone say, we in National, we thought that RMA's been a dog's breakfast for for many years. And then they say, you, the government, you've had 3 years to do something. And I'm thinking, hold on, you guys were the government for the previous 9 years.
Did you say the chair shouldn't butt in? I'm going to take the liberty of saying I spoke to Sir Geoffrey Palmer about a year ago about the Resource Management Act, which he was the author of it, and he said that there were amendments that were necessary, mainly administrative, but the fact is he said it should not be abolished, it should not be complete, it's not a complete dog's breakfast. He may have changed his mind, but that was him a year ago. All right, I'm sorry for interjecting. Right, who was the speaker?
It's okay. My question was on tree protection because we lost our 100-year-old Norfolk pine on the corner here a year ago.
Who's the next question? Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
Hello everybody, it's lovely to see you today. I'm actually Jasmine Ward and I am the selected candidate for the Advanced New Zealand Party. And I have, thank you, hello. Yes, okay, my question is for Helen White. Have you ever refused to grant a constituent a meeting when they had requested one? No, answer the question.
Sorry.
Excuse me. Helen is not an MP. She's a candidate, so question ruled out. Next one, please.
I wondered which of the candidates present today would be in favour of a system that wouldn't split the vote in electorate seats. By introducing STV, we wouldn't even have to give a second thought to tactical voting, and most people would get the MP most people preferred.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if you're aware, but this also is a real problem at local government level. And I experienced it as a big pushback against me running in 2016 in the local body elections for the mayoralty at that point in time. And I think a number of people felt as though they had to vote for what they felt was their second choice because of these fears that are put out there around strategic voting or otherwise. STV is a system of single transferable voting or preferential voting. It's utilised widely in places like Australia, and it has been incorporated in the likes of Dunedin Council, where we've got our first Green Mayor of Dunedin. And that is what happens when you have systems that enable people to put their preferences ahead of what they are being told they have to do. But I would also just finally leave everybody with the reality that right now you don't have a National Party candidate, and you need to be making your mind up at this meeting who you think the best option is for progressive representation in Auckland Central.
Thank you. Hi. For the woman who asked that question, I actually voted for STV. I think it's an excellent system. I think it's got subtleties that perhaps I didn't understand when I was voting for it, and we have this system at the moment, but yes, I think it's a good system, and it's got a lot of advantages. I think one of the things that probably is at the heart of your question is, what do you do when you actually want that kind of range to come in? And I love at least that quality of MMP, that I actually love coalition arrangements. I think they're very good for us. But I think that I'm going to go absolutely to the heart of this issue for you too, because I think it's only fair enough I do. We were 750 votes swapping from National to Labour last time, and I would have won this seat, and I would have been able to do that job. It really matters that you look at the system you have and actually make your mind up about this vote, not on the basis of something that is entirely devoid of that kind of thinking. It is a tactical system, and it is very, very important that we think about it in that way. So I appreciate your frustration. It is the system it is at the moment, and I hope that you'll give me the vote that I need to win the seat. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Look, just a quick point. One thing about MMP is the 5% threshold way too high. Secondly, because look, oh, great. People point out in countries that have chaotic political systems, look at Turkey, look at Italy, you know, and they have a low threshold, and that's why. That's not the reason. It's a function of their political systems. You know, New Zealand is a very different story. STV is not incorruptible. Those of you who follow Australian politics will know that there was a gentleman named the Preference Whisperer who created an alliance of minor parties, and if they paid him a certain sum of money, depending on how much they paid him, he would guarantee them certain seats in state senate. So it's far from an incorruptible system, but you know, the more complicated a system, the more it's open for that. But look, I suppose fundamentally, as party policy, we're not a fan of referenda on the whole, but when constitutional changes like this are going to be made, they should be made by referenda, not unilaterally by a government or coalition, and that's the way that that kind of constitutional change should be made.
I guess I should comment, given I was the biggest beneficiary of the first MMP Parliament, having waltzed straight into the cabinet. You know, Winston did a brilliant job negotiating. You know, we had 17 members, 9 of us were given ministers, and only 4 had ever been in Parliament, and 5 would go to cabinet. And I was lucky, I was the chosen. Oh, no, I shouldn't say that because it's a terrible title of a magazine. But look, I think STV is better, but MMP has worked, as far as I'm concerned. We've had the minor parties in there. The last thing I want to see is going back to first past the post, where someone like the late Sir Robert Muldoon can run a little dictatorship.
I'd just like to make a final quick comment, if I may, about how well MMP has worked in terms of the government that we have had over the last 3 years. It truly has been, for the very first time since we've had MMP, the best and truest MMP government. I think it's really important that you consider carefully your 2 votes. You have a 1 candidate vote and you have a party vote. And I think that this time for Auckland Central, you can redefine who will be best served to serve you. What I'm going to be asking for is your party vote. Take out some insurance this election. Use some strategy in terms of making sure that we don't return to a first past the post model. We have a media who want to see first past the post because that's the way they report. They report on National or Labour, and the smaller parties get lost in the wash. Just look at the leaders' debates that we've got coming up on television. You've got a National and a Labour debate, and then you've got the smaller party debates separately. That is not reflective of MMP, and we need to ensure we have that.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Chairman. Hi, speaking of MMP, my name's Christ. I'm also a candidate for the Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party. So you're obviously wondering what question I've got. It's to do with the up-and-coming referendum. When the referendum does pass in this current election, what kind of policies do you have in place to protect the citizens in this electorate from the damage that was ensued upon them when the recreational legal highs was introduced to the population of the central electorate. Thank you all, and I thank you all for attending. A small percentage of the 60,000 representatives, but if we had a bigger building, I'm sure we would have all turned up. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been told by John that I have 45 seconds to refer to the history of the Psychoactive Substances Act, the Misuse of Drugs Act 1975, and the problems that occurred under the synthetics crises. So just essentially in a nutshell, really important to know, I've written extensively about this and how we ended up with that crisis. So you had a situation where effectively there was a grey market. The Misuse of Drugs Act 1975 provides a framework whereby all of the substances that are illicit are noted. You then have to have government pass through an amendment to that bill to add new substances in. This happened with BZP. It didn't happen fast enough with synthetics because there was constantly new iterations coming out. Then, as an attempt to resolve that, the psychoactive substances legislation came through, pushed primarily by Peter Dunn. They had a clause in that bill which enabled licensing for about 15 odd synthetics that hadn't yet been complained about, but with a wraparound of regulation that required they were only sold in R18 venues and not alongside alcohol. In practice, that meant they were only sold basically at adult shops. You then had a very visible problem. Does that mean I've got no time left? Okay, great, I have Jenny's time. That means... Thank you. That means that the problem went from being one which was incredibly ubiquitous on supermarket counters, on dairy counters, to all of a sudden you have people who are already addicted to the substance lining outside of these adult shops. Subsequent to that, there was obviously knee-jerk reactions from communities who felt really worried about these people who were addicted to the substance. You then had an amendment coming up, which every party in Parliament except for the Greens voted for, which immediately withdrew those from the shelves, forcing it to go underground. There was a far better approach plausible to this if only we had listened to the evidence of public health experts and those who work in mental health and addiction.
Just a minute. There was still 0-0 after extra time. Could you send Chloe perhaps an email or a text or something, because she has put a lot of time into this effort, and so she could have answers from many of you if you chose to ask her.
As I started off, I congratulated Chloe for what she's doing, and I bowed down to her expertise. In 1997, my now very conservative criminal lawyer son, some of you fellow gold card holders may remember, he got a big splash on the front page of the New Zealand Herald because 4 months earlier he'd been convicted for carrying a marijuana cigarette. And Jim Bolger called me up and says, "Oh, your son must be really upset." Yeah, he is, Prime Minister. "What did he do?" "Oh, he went to Kawerau to buy the papers there because he went around whakata near Kawerau, bought them all up to give to his mates." But the point is, his position was, you adults, you politicians, and as I told United Nations, some of you are going out tonight to abuse drugs. Yours is called alcohol, it's legal. And in New Zealand in 1977, over 1,000 people died from various effects of alcohol. More than that died from cigarettes. No one died from marijuana. Thank you very much.
I'll just be very brief. Very brief. All right, I'll be very brief. Regardless of the outcome of the referendum and what happens, I think there are three things that need to happen regardless if it passes or not. There needs to be drug driving legislation. We have been trying to push this forward for 3 years. We've been introducing, we introduced a bill, a private member's bill. It got voted down by the government. We've been trying to reintroduce it for 3 years because it has to happen. It finally got passed in the dying stages of the second to last day of this parliament by this government. The second thing we have to do is invest in education, whether this bill passes or not. And the third thing we have to do is invest heavily in mental health addiction services, regardless of whether this passes or not. I think Chloe and I probably agree on all three of those things.
Another question. Yes, turning up down there, and then the ladies.
Tēnā koutou te whare nei, ngā mihi atu ki ngā kaumātua me ngā wahine toa, ka mihi atu ki a koutou. My question is about the Treaty of Waitangi and also about diversity and inclusion, because we've seen lately the Black Lives Matter movements, things happening here. We've also seen different political parties that are not really paying attention to racism or the treaty. So my question is, and I want you to answer really, really quickly, as an individual, where do you stand around actually supporting the treaty, and what will you do in a practical way to show that you're actually doing it?
Kia ora koutou. I'd just like to look at health and the inequities that we have in health particularly. For Māori and Pacific, they have worse health outcomes than anyone else in the population. And I think if we are going to be truly look at what does honouring te tiriti mean, then we need to ensure that we have equal access for good health outcomes for all of our population, particularly Māori and Pacific.
Ngā mihi. So, very quick period of time to try and answer Te Tiriti o Waitangi question, particularly given 160 odd years of colonisation. So I think that the first thing which is really critical to do is actually to acknowledge that. And something which I've been really proud of working on alongside Minister of Education Chris Hipkins and Associate Minister of Education Tracy Martin is the implementation of New Zealand history in schools. Because what you have there is a once in a generation opportunity to completely change the way in which our rangatahi see the world, and that I think is part and parcel of why they are at the forefront of leading on solidarity issues like Black Lives Matter. But we also have to really recognise that racism isn't this thing that happens over there, particularly, you know, America or Australia are usually our punching bag. We really have to deal with what's happening here, and there are some really live issues right here. Whether you are talking about overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, poor outcomes in health, whether you're talking about ihu mātau or oranga tamariki, all of those issues need to be addressed.
I think we are probably again in a situation where you can see a lot of consensus as our society changes and the ethos and the values of our society change. We don't even ask whether the treaty is a fundamental document anymore. We know it is, which is a really wonderful starting point. Things like access to justice are an incredibly important, like, rubber hits the road point. And right now, we really need to connect that situation where we're looking at the disenfranchisement of people just simply by their income with those issues, because all of the stats say that that is actually a connector that we're not quite making. We still have people not able to access justice because of their ethnicity. We still have a situation where people are in prison because of their ethnicity, and actually it's one of the angles on the issue of the marijuana reform is that really we have a working class drug used by a lot of Māori versus a middle class drug used by a lot of Pākehā that are treated differently. Thanks.
Thank you. It's all right. I'll just go again very quick at the end there. I'd just like to say, I just want to start off with the National Party's record of the most number of treaty settlements in our 9 years of government than in the history of New Zealand. We're incredibly focused on that. What I want to say is about education though, and again, Nikki Kay, God, she's amazing, isn't she? Just had her members' bill pulled to, which is a second language bill, but that mostly is around te reo because the connection to language is so very important. She recognised that, and so that members' bill that got drawn will allow every New Zealander who is in school to be able to learn te reo, which I think is so incredibly important for Māori. And secondly, I want to put a plug in for charter schools because I've got one in my electorate, and they have... I want to say the Vanguard Military School, who have a high proportion of Māori and Pacifica students, who have got Māori and Pacifica students achieve beyond their wildest dreams. They went from the state sector, not achieving, believing that they couldn't achieve, going into Vanguard and other charter schools, and then coming out with qualifications that will set them up for life, which is incredible. Bring it back.
I guess I've had a bit to do with the treaty. I represented the whakatoa here early 90s on our settlement process there. I also was the Crown's manager to treaty negotiations. What I'd like to say is not all doom and gloom in this country. I come from an era where there was no te reo Māori, no kapahaka, no nothing recognition of Māori back in the 50s and the 60s. And it's just wonderful. I came here last year for Te Matariki. All these kids, including my grandkids, are all fluent in te reo. One of the things that frustrates the heck out of me is we've got a case coming up on the 17th at the tribunal, and there's 50 bloody lawyers involved. It's all about...
Thank you. Now, I'm sorry that we're running out of time. Beg your pardon? 2 minutes. Now it'll need to be asked more quickly. Can you ask it to a couple of candidates only? Okay, quickly then.
Thank you. There's a part, I want to ask your party position on the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act. If you support it, and if your support or non-support of that has arrived with consultation from the trans community. Those are 2-word answers you can use.
It's not something we have policy on.
Work in progress.
Yes and yes.
Yes and yes.
It's got to be more than 2 words, I'm sorry. We're still working through that as a caucus.
For me, it's yes and yes. I'm not totally sure of the party position, but I believe it is yes and yes.
Now, I have a number of questions that came to us, to the chair, but we're not going to get through them, and we're not going to get through other questions that I'm sure the people here would like to ask. I apologise for that, but we do have to keep to a reasonable time. The presidential meetings in America were 45-second replies. Those of you who may have followed that. The question I want to pick out from here, just and just get a minute's reply on, is what is the one big issue in Auckland Central which worries you, and how would you fix it? Just one big issue. 1 minute, and not Erica. Thank you. Just 5 candidates.
I mean, I think the most visible issue, we've got 45 seconds, how long have we got? 45 seconds. All right, cool. The most visible issue is, I think, and I walk past it every single day along Karangahape Road and also down Queen Street, is homelessness. But ultimately, all of this stuff comes back to planning, and it comes back to the things that we value and the things that we invest in. And I think that that is inextricably linked to investment in the environment as well. But just today, you're more than welcome to Google it, because I'm definitely not going to be able to tell you all about it in the 45 seconds that I've got. But we released an action plan which will clear the current waiting list for housing in this country in 5 years, if we decide to invest in it. This is one of the key 6 policies that the Greens are announcing alongside our policy vision document, which is fully costed. So highly recommends that if you're interested in ending homelessness and increasing rental standards, go and have a look at that.
When there's a heavy rain, raw sewage is flushed out into our inner harbour. That is completely unacceptable, and it needs to be dealt with urgently and as soon as possible. The council has a plan which will rectify this somewhat in roughly 10 years, and look, that's great work, but it needs to happen a lot sooner than that. It needs to happen as soon as is physically possible within engineering and planning constraints, and it would be a core commitment of ours to put the money behind that and the technical support that's required to make that happen.
Waiting for 6 hours to see a doctor if you go to Auckland Hospital in an emergency is just not acceptable. Waiting for a doctor for 6 hours. So what we need to do is we need to move some of the funding that goes to the hospital, move it back to our GPs and our local communities, expand the type of work they are able to do so that it frees up space in the hospitals. So we need to look at how can we get the money to follow the patient rather than all of the money getting dumped into the DHB. We need to make sure if you go to hospital in an emergency, you're in and out quick smart, not 6 hours waiting. That's not acceptable.
I think that I would sum it up with affordability. This city has a really good lot of plans and a lot of goodwill and a lot of things that need doing to achieve that. And right now we're in a big crisis where that could be actually stripped away. And it involves things like the environment and community and housing. But we need a really strong voice advocating for that stuff here now so it doesn't get undermined because we're in an economic situation we didn't expect. We need to absolutely keep moving towards the kind of city we want to live in. And I think that's actually my issue.
Well, totally support everyone else has said. I think the root cause, one of the root causes here is an out of control Auckland City Council, that rates keep going like that up every year, way beyond inflation. You got a mayor who's paid twice what the mayor of London and New York's paid. You got a water care guy who's paid, I'm not sure what he does, except empty our dams. We've got 2,831 city council workers last month being paid over $100,000, and it goes on, and they talk, that's the market rate. No, guys, that's the market rate bubble you put yourself in, and you keep jacking up your own salaries every year.
Right, thank you very much. Well, we are now going to move to closing addresses, 2 minutes by each candidate. We've had another draw for the speaking order, and the first speaker will be Labor Party candidate Helen White.
Thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful to be here today and to have the questions that we have been asked put to us. It's incredibly wonderful to see people so engaged. We're at an absolutely critical time for our city. I actually really do genuinely love and know this community, and I want to represent it. I want to actually be the conduit to Wellington, but I also want to make sure that I'm listening to all the voices in it before I do that. And as part of that, it's a very diverse community, and there won't be people from here, from Waiheke, but it's that diverse. We have Waiheke, we have Great Barrier, we have the inner city with its issues, and you know, one of the little issues that pops up all the time at these meetings is the need for a school in the central city. And I wonder whether if we had had a Labour representative during this time, we would have had enough noise in the government to just get that issue across the line. So it's that kind of rubber hits the road, let's get those shovel-ready projects actually supported in our city that I want to bring across the line for this community. Thank you.
Swarbrick for the Green Party.
He pinged me, and so I stopped, people.
Do you want another?
No, that's all right. Thank you.
Yeah, have another minute.
Okay, go for it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you all so much. I don't know if you are aware how rare this is to have an opportunity to talk with such a large crowd of people about how we can best improve representation for our city, how we can improve our democracy, and how we can get the outcomes that we want. One of the classic questions that I always get asked, I think simply by virtue of being the young one regularly in the room, is how we get the youth excited and enrolled to vote, because we have one of the youngest electorates in the country here, and also if you look at the Electoral Commission's recent press release, 500,000 New Zealanders are currently not enrolled to vote, and half of them are under the age of 30. How you get younger people to vote is you recognise that patronising them and talking down to them simply doesn't work. They are not apathetic. Please, anybody who holds that view, talk to a young person. Younger people believe and care about things. They just don't necessarily believe that the system that they look at looks like them, sounds like them, or can deliver the change that they believe in. The campaign that we are running here in Auckland Central, in this young, diverse seat, is one to represent all Aucklanders across the diversity that is places like the Central City, like Aotearoa, Great Barrier, like Waiheke. And I want to tell you that you cannot be told how to vote. A lot of people will be invoking what happened in 2017. Folks, it is an entirely different race. You do not have... You have no incumbent. You have currently no National Party candidates. Everything about this city represents the independence from 1993 when Sandra Lee took it for the Alliance through to when Nikki Kay took it. You appreciate hard work, and I hope that I have shown you that I can be that hard worker for you, be that critic and conscience. Here, on your doorsteps and in front of you and in the pools of power in Wellington. Kia ora.
Wow, you are an amazing crowd. Thank you so much. Thank you, because you have just heard from the first or the second candidate that have just spoken tonight. One of them will be representing you in the city or the Auckland Central electorate. I believe that. It'll either be a Labour candidate or a Greens candidate. Mark my words. There is no way that I expect you to vote for me because you've never voted in the past for a New Zealand First candidate. And that's simply fact. However, what I would like you to consider, you've seen me a little bit tonight, you might see me again, well, in fact you will see me again in further debates, but you can see how collegially I work together with my colleagues. That's something I bring to the table. So thank you. What I'm asking you to consider is that you back your future, you split your vote, and you party vote New Zealand First. Thank you very much. Thank you, Julie.
Kia ora, everybody. Just to clarify something for Vernon, he can respond afterwards if he wishes. The universal basic income, Vernon, does not reduce when you are working at the 33%, unlike benefits. Refugees. I believe, and TOP is very supportive of bringing in refugees. I would like to see the refugees that we look at first are climate change refugees of those who are sinking under the ocean. Tokelau, Kiribati, Tuvalu, they're ours, they're our brothers and sisters. But in summing up, look, whoever you choose, I think tonight is shown that whoever you choose, Auckland Central will be well represented in Wellington. Kia ora koutou.
All right, I'll just start by saying you don't have to decide who you're going to vote for tonight. Regardless of what you've been told, earlier this evening, you don't have to go home tonight and write it down on a piece of paper and remember it for election day. You've got a really long time to make up your mind. And I can tell you what, tomorrow night we will have a candidate who will be of an exceptional quality, equal to that of Nikki Kay. I can tell you right now, because I know all three of them, they're amazing people. We all know how incredibly hard Nikki Kay worked for this electorate. I think everyone in this room understands what she achieved for this electorate, for Great Barrier Island, for Waiheke Island, and the incredible hard work she put in. We are a party of people who do that in most of the electorates because we hold them, and we hold them for a reason. We hold them because we are extremely hard-working, dedicated people who love our seats. And the person that we select tomorrow night will be another one of those people. And I hope that you will go to another meeting, and I hope you will meet that person, because you will see that when you meet them at that meeting. I just want to finish up by saying, because we've only got a very short amount of time, that there's a reason we're saying that we've got a strong team. We're saying we've got a strong team because we've got 53 MPs right now. We've got 53, yep. 53 MPs who have an incredible amount of experience, hard work. We represent electorates all over the country. And we've got a suite of policies that I've already mentioned tonight to drive this economy forward, because this economy will be won and lost this election will be won and lost on the economy. We are experiencing now, and we've only just seen a taste of it, but by the end of this year and early next year, an economic decline like we will not have seen for over 100 years. And the policies that we are going to be putting forward at this election in terms of being able to get people back on track and into jobs and businesses creating jobs will be the difference in this country moving forward. And I hope that, like I say, I hope you all get out to the next meeting and meet our fantastic new candidate, who will be announced tomorrow night.
Moving the port is not a left-wing, right-wing issue. Cleaning up our inner-city beaches is not a left-wing, right-wing issue. Whether we choose to grow our economy and get ourselves out of the COVID malaise by exporting IP or importing people is not a left-wing, right-wing issue. Caring about the environment is not a left-wing, right-wing issue. It's about sustainability. And this is the vision that Sustainable New Zealand puts before you. What I want to remind you, though, more than anything else in this election, is that you have 2 votes. We've got some very exciting electorate candidates, but you also have a party vote. And a thing I hear all the time is people talking about strategic voting. Well, the thing with a strategy is you all need to have the same idea of what it is you're doing. And this is the problem with strategic voting, is it's very rare. Perhaps in a candidate race, it's clear. But when it comes to party vote, it is a nonsense. Nobody is operating from the same assumptions. Nobody agrees on what exactly their strategy is. So please, I implore you, there is no such thing with your party vote as a wasted vote. It is your opportunity. It's not like you get paid if you voted for the right one, right? It's your opportunity to register your support for the ideas and for the ideology or the practice, if you will, that resonates with you, that means something to you. So please, for your party vote, think about that. Don't think about strategic voting and whether it's wasted or whether it's the left-wing or the right-wing bloc. Just vote for whose ideas make the most sense for you. And I hope that's Sustainable New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, candidates. Well, thank you again for coming to this meeting this afternoon. I was amazed. We discussed how many might be here. Martin said there have been 900 likes on Facebook, and I said, well, maybe that'll mean 50 turn up. But then I opted for 75, so I lost my bet, and it's the highest turnout that I've ever seen for an election meeting in Auckland Central, possibly the highest since leaders' debates way back. I would not count out the possibility, talk to the boss here from Ponsonby News, I wouldn't count out the fact that we might do this again when the national candidate is selected. And of course it gives others the opportunity to speak again as well. Please go out and spread the word, and as the old saying says, vote early and often. Thank you.